Hello and welcome back to the Magic Ball Grid. My name is Andre, and thanks so much for tuning in. This year we have Quorum, which is the sixth and final data pack from the Flashpoint Cycle. It just came out on Thursday last week, and I've had a bit of time to play with the cards, do some testing and stuff like that. So Quorum is the final data pack of the Flashpoint Cycle, and it's the first cycle that's been made by Damon Stone, who is our new lead designer of Android Netrunner. I think one thing that's really important to understand is that when they make a cycle, at least from my understanding, at Fantasy Flight Games, they actually have all 120 cards out first, and they test those out, and then after that point, once like the meta is balanced for these 120 cards, they package them into the 20 card pack data packs, and then they're shipped, and we get them month by month by month. So the idea is once all these cards come out and you have the full 120 cards for the entire cycle, the meta should be relatively stable, or at least balanced enough that everybody's got cards and counters to cards and stuff like that. We're gonna jump in with a runner side first. So without further ado, or actually, yeah, there's a bit of further ado. This card is called Sifr, which is the first card in the back, and it's an Anarch console, and it's been getting a lot of attention by a lot of people, and I think rightfully so. This card seems like, I don't think anybody wants to say the sky is falling exactly, but this card is, it seems a bit busted. It's really, 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 really good, and it has, like, it's definitely going to shape the meta, and I've already seen it shape the meta in a lot of online play and tournament play like that. And it's I just think the amount of time that I could spend talking about this card probably deserves its own video, and I'm specifically going to do that. So tomorrow night I'll put out a video about Sifr, in which I'll talk about it more specifically for about 20 minutes or so, just to talk about what the card does and how to play against it and what I think it's going to do to the meta and how I feel about it. Apologies if you came here to learn about Sifr, but just wait one more night. It'll be out tomorrow, don't worry. So let's start here. This is Sunya. Sunya is an Icebreaker killer, and it's an Anarch killer. It costs 3 to install, and it's 1 MU. And this card is very similar to another Anarch card that we saw called NFR. Or actually, this is worth noting. Sunya comes from Sunyata, which is it's a Sanskrit. It's a Buddhist concept for emptiness and voidness, which makes a lot of sense considering this card is largely attributed to null. We had a similar card earlier to this, and that was called Nifr. And Nifr works the very same way. So all these cards, both of these cards actually, they start at 1 strength, and they have no way to boost strength. But every time that you have an encounter with a piece of ice, which you use Sunya to break all of the subroutines on the piece of ice, it gains permanently a power counter, which is basically a permanent extra strength. So there's the only two. We don't have a code gate that does it, and I don't think we will get one, but we only have NFR for Factor and a Sunya for a killer. So obviously, when you're talking about Sunya, it's a 3 strength, basically a fixed strength breaker for 3 costs. So it's a killer. You have to compare it to Mimic, right? Mimic is largely the gold standard when it comes to killers, in and outside of Anarch, considering it's only 1 influence. And they're very similar cards. They really are. So both of these cards can deal with low strength sentries and basically need support cards in your deck to be able to deal with higher strength stuff. Now, the biggest difference between these two, obviously Mimic starts at 3 strength, this starts at 1 but can grow, but it's this paid ability window. Sunya can spend 2 credits to break a single subroutine, which Mimic can do the beautiful 1 credit for 1 sentry subroutine. And that's twice as expensive, right? On Sunya, twice as expensive. So the idea is, if you do get Sunya up to strength, which is also going to be, it's going to require some sort of help. Like, you're going to need to use things like this, like things like Data Sucker. You might want to use Null. I think Null's ability works really well with this. Also, there's oh man, what's the name of that card? There was a run card that gave you +2 strength for the end of the run, until the end of the run. I don't remember. But you basically pick a breaker and it gets +2 strength to the end of the run. Sorry, I can't remember the name of that card. I'll probably put an annotation once I figure it out. So you need some support with this, right? Like, you're probably running, if you're running Sunya, you're probably running it with Data Sucker, which means if you do use Data Sucker with this token, with this card, you're getting it up to a point where you're still just breaking for 2 credits per sentry subroutine, which is twice as expensive with Mimic. And like, the downside of Mimic is you also have to run it with support, just because you can't deal with Ichi, you can't deal with like bigger sentries. So like, regardless, you have 2 cards that you both, like, either one you have to use with a way to boost their strength, and yet Mimic is twice as good. It's basically twice as good. And so for that reason alone, like, I don't think Sunya is playable as long as Mimic exists. Like the problem with Sunya is even if Sunya came in and you paid 3 and say it just came in as 5 strength and then you couldn't boost subroutines, like you had just 5 strength, or say even it was 12 strength alone and it came in and it just said 2 credits to break a sentry subroutine, would you play it? I'm not actually convinced even you would if it had an infinite amount of strength, just because, okay, maybe you would, I don't know, but this is obviously a lot different than that. But like having to spend 2 credits to break a sentry subroutine is pretty terrible, let alone the fact that you're going to need the sort of support that you're going to need to use Mimic anyways. So for that reason, I don't get it. Compare that to Netrunner, which could, like, if Netrunner actually has like 5 strength on it and you have got it to, or 5 to 6 strength, it becomes the second best barrier breaker factor in the game. The only other one being Morningstar, which is a bit unwieldy. So this actually might become the best factor in the game as long as you can support it well. Even if you support Sunya, it's still not a good killer. And for that reason, I don't actually see how you can play this card, which is unfortunate. It's cool that he got most of a set though. That's all right, I guess. Let's move on. This is a Recon Drone, and it's a criminal piece of hardware. It's only 1 to install, and it has a neat ability. It says spend X credits, so it's up to you how much you want to spend, and you have to trash the card. It's a proper trash ability, and then you can prevent X damage from a card that's currently being accessed. It also has a quote from Khan, a little birdie told me. If you didn't predict that text, well, I think you could. So this is a card that prevents traps, specifically traps and anything on axis from firing. And I think that's actually a really big difference. As this text says prevent damage from a card being accessed, which is a lot different than if it said prevent damage during a run. So this is only going to fire on a much smaller subsection of cards that exist in the card pool. A really cool thing about it though, it says any sort of damage. It just says damage flat out. So it's actually pretty hard to come along around to cards that prevent things like brain damage or meat damage. Like mostly it's net damage, but this one actually has a chance to prevent brain damage, which is kind of cool. So what kind of cards can you access that do damage to that you want to prevent? A lot of it's just like basic trap stuff. Things like Snare is a problem. Psychic Field is obviously can easily be a problem. Then you have advanceable traps. Things like Junebug or Cerebral Overrider both can like basically be the game if you hit them at the wrong time. So this actually helps a lot with that. There's also some, I don't want to spoil too much, but we've seen a couple of upcoming cards from the new cycle. And let me tell you, Jinteki is getting some agendas and some upgrades that actually do like a fair bit of damage. So you might actually want to play this. Now, if any faction's really bad at dealing with damage, random damage from hand, it is Criminal. Like the problem with Criminal is they currently don't have any recursion. So say you have a singleton breaker, a code gate breaker, and you have it in an HQ, and then you make a run onto R&D and you access something like a Fetal AI, you get 2 net damage. And if you get your Gordian Blade in the bin and you don't have a Deja Vu, let alone I can't imagine you running a clone chip, it's going to be a problem because you probably lost 1 of 2, if not your only decoder, and that really sucks. So I see this card making sense in Criminal, considering it's the one faction that suffers the most from losing cards from hand at an unopportune time. Problem with this card is it's only on axis, right? So it doesn't stop you from dying from things like Ronin, or even obviously it doesn't stop things like meat damage. It does stop Prysec, which is kind of cute. That's on axis meat damage, which doesn't happen very often in this game. It's also trash ability, so you can use it with Geist, maybe make some money with check traders, maybe draw some cards as well. So that's kind of okay. But specifically, I don't see this card seeing any real play until there's a meta. It's like a total meta call, right? Like if you're in a meta that's playing a lot of Mushin no Shin stuff and you're worried about hitting brain damage or meat damage, net damage mostly, this seems really good, and it really does. And I think maybe we might see Mushin no Shin pop up just because there are now alternate arts going around, so people might be more tempted to play it. So for that reason, it might be okay. I also think Sifr might encourage Mushin no Shin. Just the fact that you don't need ice for that, and Sifr is really good at dealing with ice. So this actually might see some play. It's just it's a card that has a really specific ability, which is generally not useful in majority of matchups, right? Like against most HB decks, this does nothing. Against NBN, this does absolutely nothing. But if you're playing against a lot of Jinteki, this might be worth something. Let's move on. This is Tapwrm, and I absolutely adore this card. It's 0 to install, and it's 1 MU. 0 to install is a big deal, and it's a virus. And criminals have some of the coolest viruses, and I wish that was more explored in this game. So they're all generally finance-based, so things like Cash and Gorman Drip are awesome. But Tapwrm has a condition on it. You can only install it after you made a successful run on a central server this turn. So that's very similar to something like Data Leak Reversal. And it says when your turn begins, gain 1 credit for every 5 credits in the corpse credit pool. And then Tapwrm does get trashed if the Corp purges viruses. This is absolutely nutty. Like, this is an absurd card, and I really, really like this. Let's not even talk about best case scenario. Let's just talk about a reasonable case scenario. You're running against a corporation. They have 15 to 20 credits, something like that. And you run archives for Dirty Laundry, for Temujin, for whatever reason. And then you spend a click installing this. Now, if this is your only virus, you're not running Medium or you're not running Data Sucker, and the corp isn't, say, like if the corp is playing Cyberdeck's Virus Suite, that gets a bit easier to deal with this, but say they're not. Like if they're not, the corp has to spend an entire turn purging to get rid of a single card. And if the corp has 20 credits, which isn't unreasonable if you're playing some sort of control version, control slow game, you're making 4 credits at the beginning of every turn. 4 credits, and you can put 2 of these out and make 8 credits. The more of these out you have, obviously the better it is for the corp to purge. But like, if they have 15 credits alone, which isn't hard to imagine, you're making 3 credits at the beginning of your turn every turn. So free, easy mark that you spent 1 click. And if worse comes to worse, if the corp does purge this, that's an entire turn they've lost. So you basically played a 0 credit card that made you some money maybe, and it basically says the corp loses a turn somewhere down the line. Like, it's really hard to deal with this. It really, really is. If you're playing against something like Blue Sun, it's absolutely fantastic because purging for Blue Sun can be hard if they're not running Cyberdecks. There is some counterplay with this card and Cyberdeck's Virus Suite. Obviously, the corp can pay 3 credits just to get these out of the way already. I don't know if people are playing Cyberdeck's Virus Trial, but that's also a thing. But I've played with this card a bunch. I've tested it. I've really enjoyed it. I've also seen corps trying to trick you into running into their Cyberdeck's Virus Suite just so they can save some money. Like they'll put it on HQ as an upgrade and you'll access it and get your Tapwrms trashed. So I think specifically if you're running viruses, you might not want to run this card just because it sweetens up the purge action. I think maybe one of the things I'm most excited about is that this card works in the opposite of the way that criminals worked as of before this cycle, right? Like prior to the cycle, the criminal MO was just account siphon your opponent to death, so they have no money. So then you can do things like forged activation order, or just, if they've been siphoned to the ground, they can't do anything. And then you could play Gorman Drip and then click for credits and you'd make money. This card specifically works better if the corp has money. So it pairs well with things like Hernando Cortez, at least in the short run, I guess. And other things like maybe Beth Kilrain Chang and stuff like that. Like, I think it's interesting that there's more of a control criminal game that doesn't matter if they have money. Like, they want the corp to have money. Because if your siphons land early, they don't have money. And if they do have money, you'll be making money anyways. If criminals are all about making money, this card seems pretty good. Does take up 1 MU, so you hopefully have to have a slot for that. It's probably not going to be around all game, so you can always trash over it. Like, you've only paid 0 for it anyways. And maybe with things like Sifr, you have extra MU. Not entirely sure. But this card's sweet. It's just really easy to play. Put it in a deck, you'll probably make, on average, 4 credits with this. And then if the corp purges, so be it. That's pretty okay. Now let's move on. We have another criminal card, and this one's like pretty wacky. This is called Tracker, and it's 0 to install again. By the way, this card and the last card, I think the last card might actually be a good target for best defense. If criminals are running Tapwrm, pay 2 with best defense. I should pull these cards up, shouldn't I? Right? So I should also spell them right. So best defense trashes cards. If you have no tags, it trashes 0 install cost cards. So this is a good counter to Tapwrm. Less so of a good counter to Tracker, just because I think Tracker is less of a strong card immediately. But anyways, so 0 to install. Tracker is 2 MU, which is kind of a big deal considering there's not a lot of 2 MU cards in Criminal. The other one is Sneak Door Beta, and that's like a really strong card. So let's see what this one does. When your turn begins, choose a server. So that's similar to what's that security card? Man, I'm forgetting all the card names now. You can spend a credit and 2 clicks and you can make a run on a chosen server. Now you prevent the first subroutine that would resolve this run from resolving. So you basically pay 2, make a run on server, and then the corp can choose to res or whatever, just like a normal run. Maybe everything's res, and the first subroutine that fires, you say no, it's not gonna fire, and maybe you're into a server. I think people are gonna compare this to like basically an on-demand inside job, but it's, I think, in a lot of ways a lot worse than that. Like, inside job says make a run, bypass the first piece of ice encountered during this run. And in theory, Tracker is comparable without actually being weak to bypass countering stuff. But the difference is that Tracker only works as an inside job if you're running against single pieces of ice. How good is that? I'm not actually entirely sure. There was a criminal card that came out called Vamadeva, which was a criminal AI breaker. It was also a Deva, which I didn't see those catch on, but it also dealt with ice that exactly has one subroutine, and I didn't see this one catch on either. So I'm not sure. I think this card was admittedly way too expensive. So that's probably a reason why. Like single subroutine ice are specifically good for rushing, and if your rush answers put down 6 credits for a Vamadeva just so that you can also spend more money to break, that does admittedly seem a lot worse than Tracker. Very important to understand how this text works. It says prevent the first subroutine that would resolve from resolving, so you're not actually breaking anything. So if your plan was to use this with E3 feedback implants, it actually does not work because you're not actually breaking anything. One card that the tracker does work with is Grappling Hook, which I think it's very difficult to build a substantial rig with this, considering this is MU and your tracker's MU. But the idea is with Tracker and Grappling Hook, you can pay 2 credits to basically break any piece of ice, regardless of how many subroutines it has, which could be okay. Maybe you need to play this with Geist. I'm not entirely sure. Best part about Tracker is that you can rush early remotes, and if you have cards that basically benefit off of making on-axis effects, because the worst thing I think about this card by far is that it takes a click to use, so you can't combine this with run ability. Like this card would be a lot different if it just said choose a server, when you're running on the server you can pay 2 to prevent the first subroutine from firing, because then you could actually combine that with things like Inside Job, with Dirty Laundry, with Account Siphon, and this card would be way stronger than it actually is currently. Maybe you're paying 2 credits to gain like 5 back with Temujin. That seems okay. You're probably gaining 2 credits just to check early servers that the corp is rushing behind, but I'm not entirely convinced that's okay. The flavor text on this card is from Khan, which is actually interesting because it's worth considering. If you're using this ability to hopefully get through a piece of ice, now Khan's ability is online, so you can start installing breakers for cheaper, and that might be like an easy way to get Khan's ability from firing, similar to Inside Job, but technically more permanent. So that might be worth something. I actually think one of the stronger uses of this card, and it's super niche but like super effective, is that Marcus Batty doesn't work. Like imagine you're running on a server and you're going to break all the ices anyway, all the ice anyway. You prevent the first subroutine from firing. So if they fire Marcus Batty and you lose the side game, Tracker prevents Marcus Batty from firing. And Marcus Batty firing is like a really scary thing for criminals anyways. So that's actually like okay. 2MU is really hard. Like I think you need to do something really strong with this card, and I don't see it just quite yet. I guess last thing we can say, and again, like this is just such a clumsy combo considering the amount of like space it takes up. Multi-threader, you can use these credits to use your tracker because it's using a program, and so you can use your tracker for free, which is okay. But more importantly, well, not more importantly, right? Because I still don't think it's amazing. But you can host your Omni. You can't host your Omni Drive. Never mind. It's more than 1 MU. So keep trying to say Omni Drive is a card you can play, but I'm not actually convinced this is good either. So I'm not actually sure entirely what you do with this, right? I think the best case scenario is that like if you say they're rushing, say an NBN is rushing a Sansan behind a toll booth, and you tracker it when the toll booth is on res, I don't think they'll res the toll booth, which is the easiest way to get through it. But that's the same as playing an Inside Job, right? I'm not entirely sure how to use this. If you have any ideas, like what you're excited to do with this, let me know, right? Just write in the comments, because I think there's something here. I'm just not sure what. Professor even? I'm not sure. We'll see. Marcus Batty for now, I think is the best. This is Marron, and what an absolutely fantastic card. He's unique. He's 2 credits, so you only get 1 Aaron at a time, 1 Marron at a time. He's a connection, which is really good for connection decks. You can pull out with Hostage. It goes on the off-campus apartment if you want. And it says, whenever an agenda is scored or stolen, place 2 power counters on Marron. Now, you can use your hosted power counters at any time there's a paid ability window, which is generally all the time in Netrunner. And you can, for a hosted power counter, remove a tag and draw a card. It's also only 2 influence. This card is nutty. This card is super good, and kind of goes back to the whole idea that all the cards, the 120 cards in the Flashpoint Cycle, are tested together, and then the fact that they're released at like, I don't know how well they time out the releases, whether it is so that there's like an up and down in the meta, but this card does so much for criminal and does so much actually for anyone. Like I think you can really splash this for 2 influence. So throughout the game of Netrunner, the corp is going to be scoring agendas and you're going to be scoring agendas. So if you get this down early enough, there's going to be, say, 4 or 6 counters on this by the end of the game. Maybe even more. Um, if you've been playing Netrunner in the competitive meta for the last couple months, you understand how scary tags are, and that's for two main reasons. Firstly is how good this card is, and that's breaking news. It is on the most wanted list if you're playing competitively, which means it costs an influence to include in your NBN deck, even though it is an NBN card. And it's a 2/1 that when you score, you give the runner 2 tags, which despite like very few cards, those tags generally land. And when those tags are on a runner, you can do a lot of like really mean things. You can just flat out kill the runner if they're not prepared for it. Things like boom. But probably the most common one is exchange of information, which says basically you score breaking news and you exchange of information, the breaking news for a global food initiative, and there's a huge credit swing. And not only that, the runner keeps the tags from breaking news because the text is no longer active on it. It's absolutely like just a horribly it's a really, really strong combo, and there's a lot of the win conditions for a lot of decks. Another really strong ID in the competitive meta throughout this entire cycle has been controlling the message. And controlling the message basically gives out tags if you trash things. And it has this really weird thing at the end here, which says the tag cannot be avoided. So if you're playing something like just Minder Serene, or you're playing New Angel City Hall, you're kind of out of luck. Even Forger, you're out of luck. A lot of people have been playing New Angel City Hall in the competitive meta. I've been playing it in just about every criminal deck I've been playing for the last 4 or 5 months because of the existence of breaking news. And now when the corp scores, like that was the idea with New Angel City Hall, right? The corp scores breaking news, and then you pay 4 credits and you dodge all the tags, and they can no longer follow it up. This card is also a bit more finicky. It costs a lot more money to use, but it's also just all in all good. And now we have Marron. If the corpse scores breaking news, you get 2 counters on it. So you can just, right on their turn, remove the tags and draw 2 cards. And now the breaking news does nothing. Going back to controlling the message, right? Controlling the message says you can't avoid the tag, but you can basically like trash a card if you have counters on Marron, trash a card from a remote, take the tag. And this doesn't say avoid the tag, this says remove the tag. So you basically remove the tag, which gains you 2 credits and a click, and you draw a card, which is an absurd amount of synergy. It's just super good. Even like, you know, if you're playing criminal, you can obviously pay account siphon. So you account siphon HQ, you take 2 tags, you clear both of the tags and draw 2 cards, which if you've never seen anybody play this card, it's just frankly just so much better than playing lawyer up. Remove tags, this is draw 3 cards, but it's also a double and cost 2, so you know, not so hot. This card's absurd. It's really good. And what I really like about this card, which we've been seeing a lot more in the design space of Netrunner, is that if you're going to print these sort of like silver bullet cards, as what people refer to them to, the idea is that it's a card that really helps you against a specific matchup. So if we want to go back to New Angel City Hall, it was a card that helped you. Okay, well, you know what it looks like, right? It was a card that helps you specifically against tagging decks, which prior to the controlling the message meta wasn't that good. If you're playing criminal, there was a bit of an argument for it because it makes account siphons a lot better. But a lot of the times, if you put this card in your deck, it's your reaction to the meta. Now, compare that to Marron, which even if there's no tags going on, if the corp scores 2 agendas, you score 2 agendas, and then your mid to late game, this card just got you 8 clickless draw, and it's good regardless of the matchup. Like free card draw whenever you want it for 2 credits up front is absolutely nutty, and I think it's a really good design. If I want to talk about another good card that does something similar to that, it's like Sports Hopper. Compare this to Plasky Carapace, which was generally the way that you don't die to a lot of matchups. And now we have this card, which also gives you Link, and you can also pop it to draw 3 cards. So it doesn't matter if you're not playing against Wayland or some sort of NBN. This card is just good, and it's just flexible in the design. And I think this is really good. Knowing when to use the counters is technically skill. Like knowing when to use Aaron, when to draw, when to not draw. That's a high skill cap card, and I'm super excited to see this. I think this card is going to be just about permanently a 1 or 2 of in most criminal decks going from now on. Like I think there's a bunch of cards you can assume are in every criminal deck and play around them. Aaron, Account Siphon, Temujin Contract. And yeah, Aaron is now the new one there. I said it first. And I think that's really good. I also think for 2 influence, you can easily splash this in something like Shaper. So that's fine. Like it's just a great card. It's so good. And I'm super happy that we have this because tags are getting to be a bit oppressive. Let's move on. This is the first Shaper card we have, and for 0 credits, we have Encore, and it's such a Shaper card. You can only play this if you made a successful run on R&D, HQ, and Archives, which is the super turn. We've seen a couple cards like this before. One of them is Shaper, one of them Anarch. And it says if you do that, you can play this for your 4th click, and you can take an additional turn after this one. You have to remove Encore for the game instead of trashing it, though, so you can't abuse this and like continually play turns over and over and over again. this is a quite exciting card. Just to give you a bit of idea of how the math works, or not the math, but what that means, take another turn after this one. It means that all your beginning of your turn, whatever conditions fire. So if you're running stealth credits, all those stealth credits refresh. If you're running things like Beth, Kilrain, Chang, and you had a 5-click turn, your next turn can probably be a 5-click turn as well. Things like Daily Cast, all that stuff fires, which is really good. It's also totally worth noting, I'm like 90% sure if you play 2 Encores in a single turn, which is definitely possible, you don't get 2 turns after this, you only get 1. So you want to basically, if you want to play 4 turns in a row, which is totally possible now with Encore, and if you do it, I don't know if you actually won the game, but you probably won something that's more important. So I would actually probably try to do that. And if you get 4 turns in a row, that's awesome. That's actually really, really cool. So the question is, what can you do with an extra turn in Netrunner? And I think you can do a lot. Let's just look at the deck list really quick. There's an archetype of Shaper that's been around for a while, and it's called Diaper. Generally, I think it's a combination of the word DDoS and hyper. It's a portmanteau. And these decks are one OTK decks. I've talked about them before on my channel. Here, this came in top 16 of Worlds 2016, right? And the idea with these decks is that this'll do it. The idea with this deck is that it gets a super hyper turn, where it has a lot of clicks, and they do that by running things like Hyperdriver. So if you have 3 Hyperdrivers on the table and then you have a Beth, you have like a turn that's like 13 clicks. You can also play things like Hard at Work, All Nighter, which gives you extra clicks as well. And then with the super turn, you basically get all the ice off of R&D using this like False Echo combo with False Echo and DDoS, and then you go nuts on R&D and you keyhole them like 12 times. If you also want, you can add a bunch of cards to this combo. If you want to, really, like you can add Notoriety, which gets you free agenda points at the end of the game if you like. And basically Encore slots really well into this deck. How well, I'm actually not entirely sure. The idea is that if you do your massive False Echo combo deck, like you'd have to run Archives, right? So okay, you get all your Hyperdrivers off, you keyhole R&D a bunch of times, you run Archives to pick up the agenda points, you run HQ once, and if you have 1 click left, you play this Encore card. And now you can do it again. Probably you have 5 clicks so that you can like keyhole 4 more times, run Archives. I think that actually might be overkill, but it's probably a good card. If there's any deck that can use it, it's probably this one. There's some other ways to play this card that make it a bunch easier to play. Out of the Ashes is a Shaper card. Like if there's any faction that can get extra clicks on their turn to help this fire, it's Shaper. They have things like Out of the Ashes, which you basically make a free run at the beginning of your turn. You have Beth, Kilrain, Chang, which can give you another click at the beginning of your turn too, which helps a lot. And you have, like we've seen, Hyperdriver and All Nighter. So it's actually not that ridiculous to even play this card if you've thrown it out earlier and it's from your heap. If you throw it out an Encore, that you can make 3 runs and same old thing Encore, which seems really good. I guess another card you could try to throw into this mix, and I actually think this card is a bit better than people think it is Comet. And the idea is that you can make 3 runs on 3 central servers, and then play Comet and play Notoriety and Encore in the same turn, which seems okay. This is just crazy Shaper tricks, right? Like really, really insane Shaper tricks. Are there other cool ways to use this card? Yeah, maybe. Getting an extra turn is really good, but it's also not like, I don't think that's something you want to play unless every single run on the central is actually like is worth doing. Like I'm not convinced if getting a single access on HQ and an Archives just to get another turn is worth doing. So I think you have to do something clever with it. By far the best way to use Encore is with Apocalypse. The idea is that if you get an extra click through Out of the Ashes or Hard at Work or something like that, not Hard at Work, I keep calling it that, All Nighter, is that you can make 3 runs. So make a legwork, run Archives, I don't know, Dirty Laundry R&D or indexing or whatever, and then you can play Apocalypse, or I think you play Encore first and then you play Apocalypse. And then the board is wiped and you basically have a full 4 clicks to capitalize on that. So you can start throwing down things like indexing. You can get a keyhole out, maybe if you have SMC in hand, something like that, and you can actually like do a lot of damage and probably close out the game, and that's probably worth it. I think people will play Apocalypse with Encore and Shaper and play these like really destructive decks, and I think they're probably good. They're probably all right. Okay, next we have Fawkes. Fawkes is the icebreaker killer. If you don't know, I think it's Isaac Fawkes. Isaac Fawkes is, yeah, he was an English conjurer from 1675 to 1732. He did a lot of magic stuff, worked a bunch with automata. If you don't know what automata are, you gotta check YouTube because there's some really nuts stuff that has been made in the last like 500 years or so. 400 years. That's like super impressive mechanical stuff. Anyways, this is Fawkes, so it's named after him. If you don't know, all the stealth breakers in this cycle, all the Shaper stealth breakers have been named after famous magicians, illusionists, conjurers. So this is the last one we have, and it's a killer. 5 to install, 1 MU, has 2 paid abilities. It starts at 1 strength, and it's only 2 MU, so I guess you could splash this. And for 1 credit, you can break a sentry subroutine, and then for X credits, you can get plus X strength, but for the remainder of the run. And you can only use this ability by spending at least 1 credit from a stealth card. So it's like a mixture of Gordian Blade and Paperclip in some ways. The idea is well, no, not really. It's just basically kind of Gordian Blade, but you have to use at least 1 stealth credit to boost. So for 1 stealth credit, 1 normal credit, you got basically fixed strength 3 sentry breaker that breaks 1 sentry subroutine per shot, which is very comparable to Mimic. Okay, so we have, I think, 2 other options for stealth killers, and let's look through them. The first one is the most comparable, and that's called Dagger. This came out in the first deluxe, which is called Creation and Control, and it's actually very comparable to this card, right? You see that? So Dagger, 3 to install, so it's a bit cheaper. It's also 1 MU, and it has the same idea. It's 1 sentry subroutine per credit. Now, this is where it differs. Daggers can spend 1 stealth credit. It has to be stealth credit to get plus 5 strength. It's not for the end of the run, but it's plus 5 strength. So the design space for a lot of sentries is low strength, a lot of subroutines, which by the way is why Sunya is not so hot. So generally with Dagger, you're probably only going to have to boost once. So you're playing 1 stealth or subroutine, so you're up to 5, 1 stealth credit, and then, you're up to 5 strength, and then you pay per subroutine. Compare that to something like Fawkes, which if you had to break something like an Ichi's generally my standard sentry breaker to compare things to. You have to spend 1 stealth credit, and then at least 2 other stealth credits, and then break 1 per subroutine. So it is basically 2 credits more expensive than using Dagger. Now the difference is Fawkes retains strength. So say that we have 2 Ichis in a row, Fawkes would only have to spend 3 more credits to break, while Dagger would only have to spend another stealth credit, which actually still makes Dagger cheaper at breaking 2 Ichis in a row, right? Yeah, it does, which is kind of nuts. So in which way is Fawkes better than Dagger? I'm not actually entirely sure. I think for most of the time, Dagger is just inherently better. Just because, like, say you have 3 sentries in a row and you have to use 3 stealth credits for Dagger, and what about if you had 3 sentries in a row? Like, as long as if they're all under 3 credits, that's the only way it's cheaper. So the only way for Fawkes to be cheaper than Dagger, if you have 3 sentries in a row, is that if they're all 2 strength or less. If there's 3 in a row, it's the same cost. And yes, I guess Dagger is much more of a hog when it comes to stealth credits. I don't actually think that's a problem anymore, considering Netrunner is incredibly liberal with stealth credits. But that's the only difference. I guess the existence of Fawkes allows a runner to make a rig that is super low on stealth. The idea is that you can run with just smoke and Netrunner, and you maybe don't even need cloaks and daggers, and you can begin to break stealth breakers earlier in the game, or you can break sentries earlier in the game. So I guess this does allow you to use a more minimal rig if you'd like. Minimal rig generally isn't Shaper's MO, but I think there's some, that elegance should be appreciated. But then if you do want to go a minimal rig, this is more expensive to install anyways, and it's probably going to be more expensive to use. So I don't actually know if that's worth it. So I think Dagger's just largely better, and Dagger doesn't rotate out either, which is interesting. I don't know. The other stealth killer you can use is Switchblade, and I think Switchblade is by far the best. You do spend influence on this one, but this one basically says 2 stealth credits break regardless. I think it only doesn't deal with like 2 sentries in the game. Break all subroutines, and this one's really good. Again, with the existence of Netrunner, I'm not convinced that stealth credits are that hard to come by. I think it's also a bad idea if you're running a stealth deck to make all 3 of your breakers use stealth. Generally, you want to go for 1 or 2. So I think Refractor Switchblade is still probably the best you can do. Maybe there's an argument for Houdini. So I don't know. I'm not actually that impressed by Fawkes. I thought the numbers could be better. The one thing that it can do kind of well is that with its retaining strength subroutine, it's technically interesting to put on Baba Yaga. I don't know if you want to strap another 5 cost program to Baba Yaga and then you strap a Yogg, and like this thing becomes so expensive when in theory you could have also just strapped on the Switchblade and it'd probably be just as good. So not convinced about this card at all. This is the last runner card we have, I believe, and it's called Peace in Our Time. And this is a really interesting card. It's a 1 to play, it's a neutral event, it's also a priority event, so it says you can only play it as your first click, but it also goes on to have a more precise condition. It says you can also only play it if the corp scored no agendas during their last turn. And what it does when you play it, you pay 1 and you gain 10 credits back. Now the corp also gains 5 credit, and this turn that you play it, you can't initiate any runs. So it's also 1 influence, which is totally worth knowing. And this card is interesting. It's actually, I think, going to see a whole bunch of play. So this card for 1 credit for 1 click makes 9 credits, which I might be mistaken. That is the highest credits to clicks ratio in the game. I know you could obviously play that criminal card in which you bet all your money away and you have an opportunity to make more, but like this is, sure, it's a bit conditional, but it's the most money per click, which is totally something in this game. Compare this to something like Day Job, which is gain 8 for your entire turn. This gains 9 for a quarter of your turn. Now, giving the corp money is generally a bad thing to do in this game. Obviously, they can use their money to score agendas, to res ice, to play operations, like to do everything that you'd possibly want to do in the game. So I think if you want to play this, you want to play it in a deck where you either benefit from the corp having money or you mitigate if the corp has money, it doesn't matter that much to you. So let's go, I think, through all the factions and just quickly talk about what we can do. First, I think I closed it, right? Maybe we can find it again. But you remember that deck that we talked about right here that's called a diaper deck? This deck actually doesn't run very often, if at all. Like, the only time it runs is generally that one hyper turn where it tears stuff up. And I've had a bunch of friends who are playing some sort of deck like this. A lot of times I've seen it more often in Kate. But this deck generally needs, I think I was told, it needs about 20 to 30 credits to be able to fire. And being able to make a third of the credits necessary for your entire game plan in a single card is really good. The fact that the corp has 5 credits doesn't matter that much because this deck does not allow the corp to res their ice. And resing ice is generally where most of the corp's money goes to. Especially considering it's possible to put a clone, like a clot in this deck so you can stop fast advance. I think that's really good. The idea that if you're playing a deck like this, a combo deck, giving the corp money might not matter that much, and giving yourself money is really, really, really good. So that's Shaper. I think Shaper can do that very well. Also, of course, Beth Kilrain Cheng exists. So if the corp has money, even if you give the corp 5 credits, now they're up to 15 credits, you're gaining an extra click a turn, which probably is worth it. If you go to Anarch, there's 2 very good runners that I think can capitalize on this. One, you got Valencia. Valencia Estevez has bad publicity out of the gate, so obviously it's actually not that obvious, surprising. I've seen a lot of decks that I don't run 3 of. But you can run Blackmail, which if you want to recur Blackmail nearly indefinitely with things like Trope, Same Old Thing, Deja Vu, you can basically never allow the corp to res ice, so even if you give them all the money in the world, it might not matter. And I think gaining 9 credits for 1 click is probably okay. So I think that's something. I think she can definitely run it. Another one is Noise. Noise might just want money to sit back and install a whole bunch of viruses and not run that often. So maybe you need 9 credits, just install 3 viruses and then play your Hades shard and maybe win the game. Noise is a bit of a harder sell just because I think playing passively is not that good in Netrunner. You might actually have to contest assets and stuff like that. But I think Noise possibly could do it. On the criminal side, it's a bit harder. I think you have 2 main options maybe. One is Leela. Leela Patel is really good at playing a defensive Netrunner and capitalizing once the corp has scored a card. If you're not running aggressively, the corp can't res their ice a lot of times, and you can basically capitalize. Like if they score an agenda, you can bounce ice on R&D and then keyhole or medium really hard and then bounce ice on HQ, and things fall apart really fast. So the fact that you're giving corp money might not be that much a problem. And if you're playing like defensive slow game with like Caddy Jones and just putting down 3 RDIs, R&D interface, that actually might be pretty good. On top of that, like to count siphon the corp, they need money, so sometimes giving them 5 credits is kind of all you need. You can't siphon this turn, siphon next turn maybe. And I think a really good card if you're playing that sort of like slow Leela deck is you can play things like Gang Sign. So you can play this and hopefully the cards like flood up in HQ and you can grab them. It doesn't work so much with Fisk Investment Seminar considering they're both priority events, so that's kind of a bummer, but those actually would be good together. One thing totally worth knowing is that this card is priority, so you can't same old thing it, so you actually can't abuse it that easily. You're probably only playing them once a piece unless you levy or something like that. So that's not that easy to abuse. Lastly is things like, we've talked about this before, like Tapwrm works really well with Peace in Our Time, as well do things like Hernando Cortez, which I haven't pulled up so far, so let's do that. Lastly, one thing I want to say about this card is that you're gaining more money than the corporation. That's Hernando. So in theory, Vamp is still a viable option. So that's actually pretty good. But yeah, just the fact that for one influence, you can basically make 9 credits on a turn. You can't run that turn, so it's not like you can play this like it is a stim hack and then make a bunch of runs. But if you're planning for next turn, this might be all you need. This actually might be all you need. 1 for 9 is like super good. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's all the runner cards in this pack. And I think there's some really good stuff. Specifically, I think that a lot of the criminal stuff is absolutely fantastic. Aaron Marron? Is that right? Yeah, Aaron Marron is like just one of the best criminal cards printed in a long time. The last one I think was Temujin. That's that good. And I think Tapwrm is also really exciting. Now obviously Sifr is going to get its own conversation in a bit. So we'll put that out tomorrow, hopefully. And then we'll have the corpse side coming up really soon. I think it's a really exciting pack, and it's really cool to see the end of the whole cycle conclude so we can see everything as a whole, and we'll stay tuned for the rest of the stuff that I guess we'll be talking about. Cool. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Please, if you want to talk about the cards, maybe I missed something, maybe something you're excited about, like specifically when it comes to deck lists. Yeah, why don't you talk about it? I'll talk about it in the comments below. Cool. Ciao.